This is Andy.
Andy Basago, Daniel here at the Edge Television Broadcast.
Hi, Daniel.
Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Good to be back.
Well, hey,
thanks for having me.
Well, sure. I want to kind of follow up. This is like a part two here because I want to just briefly touch base with you. You ran, before we get into time travel and the various other things that you want to talk about, you ran for president in 2016. How'd the campaign turn out for you?
Well, I got a vote for every dollar invested. I got about 20,000 votes for the $20,000 that I raised. Mm-hmm. My 100 proposals, which was really one of the only platforms offered by any of the candidates, was lauded by pundits as awesome, brilliant, unrivaled, mind-blowing, genius in print, a life experience to read even.
Wow.
And it did get covered by the BBC in England, but not here. There didn't seem to be any interest during the 2016 campaign in what the president would actually do after being elected. And I offered a vision, and I'm proud of it, and it was very well received. So,
Well, you know what they say, where there's no vision, the people perish. And I tell you what, this country is surely lacking for some vision, Andrew. Basically, give me a quick summation of a couple highlight points that changes you would like to see in this country.
Well, that's a very broad question, but essentially my platform was founded on three pillars. Those pillars being truth, reform, and innovation. So in the area of truth, the first 17 proposals called for basically a new transparency in our country about things that are essentially part of the reality that we inhabit, but that the government will not acknowledge, like the extraterrestrial situation, like the advent of time travel back in the 1970s, like the fact that we've had a secret space program that I myself participated in that first put American astronauts on the planet Mars in 1964. So the truth was essentially the thrust of my 100 proposals. That's why I put the 17 truth proposals first, and that's what I hope to be as President of the United States, is a truth president on behalf of the American people.
Well, I think one of the reasons Donald Trump, as a non-politician, got elected because, I'm not going to highlight him as anybody other than just a candidate, but I don't think we can trust anybody. My ranting points tonight, I don't know if you ever see me do a ranting points, Andy, but my ranting points is about the FBI claiming, that they're going to get to the truth of the matter of the Vegas shooting, and they've got all this time, and there's not a single shred of evidence of what the shooter's motive was, and my gut feeling tells me that there's a story that's been massaged, that's going through focus groups, that's being checked. Rather than just telling us what it is or what they found, it just seems that there's going to be another kind of message that they're developing right now that they're going to roll out for public consumption. But going back in the FBI's history, as in the 2016 and going in the 4 years of the last Obama administration, they've done so many things that undermined the trust that I can't believe what they're saying. So truth is in short supply in this country.
Well, let me emphasize this, Daniel. I am an American astronaut. And when John Glenn was the first American to circle the Earth in space, he came back to the Earth and he was celebrated in a ticker tape parade in New York City. If you look at my public career, I have been subjected to withering contempt simply for telling the truth about what I've done for our country. And it hasn't been nice. I mean, it's been a pretty awful situation. So I would just underscore that point. We have a government that cannot tell the truth. I was just listening to Robert David Steele, the former CIA officer, talking about the fact that he's trying to redeem Congress through his Election Reform Act, and he's avoiding other issues. But he's now addressing, for example, the American presence on Mars. He doesn't want to touch it too much, but he has broached the subject because it's emblematic of the 70-year history of lying by the American government to the American people. We haven't even told the truth. I mean, the enabling legislation for NASA was, I think, the major principle was to foster a public understanding of space and the near-Earth environment. And here we have a situation where the government has been lying to where we've gone in our solar system. So I would just use my career as an example, just to do a little reality testing. I'm not some kook over here making bizarre claims. I have brought forward multiple fellow whistleblowers who also served in the secret space program. We are American astronauts, and yet we cannot have our experiences understood and contextualized properly by the media and by the public because the government simply has not been telling the truth about what we've been doing. And I would just contrast the way we've been treated vis-a-vis the way, let's say, the Mercury astronauts were treated. They were treated as American heroes. And I'm not asking that we be celebrated as heroes, but I am asking that we be treated with respect because we served our country and we served the cause of science and exploration. And because of this degradation of the truth, we've been unable to be contextualized in history and in public policy and public life.
In the secret space program you're describing, do you know how many astronauts that have been or are in that program?
William Whitecrow, who was one of my trainers when I was time traveling for Darpa in the early 70s as a child, and then we crossed paths on Mars when I was in college. He estimates that in that period in the early 80s where most of us were going up to Mars, there were about 1,500 participants. I think that's probably a pretty good estimate, but I have no idea. I just know that I was trained with a group of 10 Americans in our late teens and early 20s in 1980, and we were one of a number of teams that were being trained. I've heard estimates everywhere from 40 people went to Mars to literally that there's a colony there of 550,000 people. The bottom line is I don't know, but I think that Whitecrow's estimate of about 1,500 active jumpers and settlers by, let's say, 1982, 83 is fairly accurate. I just heard Robert David Steele, by the way, with Carrie Cassidy, stating that we've had a Mars colony for 15 years, and that's woefully an underestimate in terms of how long the U.S. presence has been there. But again, in terms of the number, I just don't know. I was never privy to that information.
When was the last time you jumped?
May of 1984, right before I earned my first of a number of degrees. My BA in history from UCLA in June of '84. Mm-hmm. A month earlier, in May of '84, was my last jump of about 40.
When you jump, does it degrade your physical body in any way?
Well, I was actually contacted by Jack Pruitt in 2003. We met at the old Sweeney Auditorium in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was advising me that the adults who had been the child teleportees in Project Pegasus were developing a disease that mimics diabetes, and I certainly have contracted that syndrome, and it's had negative effects on my health. In terms of the specific medical effects of the jumping to Mars, I don't know. It was extremely stressful. Basically, this elevator essentially twisted from a box into a cylinder, and it was extremely it was an extremely stressful process to undergo. It was difficult not to throw up, basically, but it was extremely mind-bending because the whole room was twisting and us with it.
You said there's jumpers and there's settlers. That brought me to this question out of the live chat from Kentucky Girl. It says, is it true that Eisenhower's daughter was asked to be a Mars colonist?
I'm the relationship wrong there. Laura Magdalene Eisenhower is the great-granddaughter of President and Mamie Eisenhower, and she was approached in 2006 and 7 to settle on Mars in the Mars colony with her two boys who were then 10 years of age, her twin boys, Gavin and Garrick Eisenhower. And I know all three of them. They're very good friends of mine. Laura's a dear friend of mine, and that is in fact true, and I corroborate her testimony. In fact, let me mention something about Laura's testimony. When she was first interviewed by Alfred Lambermont Weber and other exopolitical researchers about her experiences, she stated how she was told that she would be going back and forth to Mars via Ark, and she thought they were analogizing to Noah's Ark, ARK, and we're talking about space planes. In fact, she didn't know it as she was revealing it, that ARC was the acronym for Aeronautical Repositioning Chamber, or ARC, which was the technical term for the jump rooms. So what I'm saying here is when Laura described quite ingenuously, I mean, there's no doubt she was telling the truth about how she was approached in 2006 and 2007 about settling on Mars with her twin boys. She didn't know in the revelation of her experience that she was revealing the technical term for the jump rooms. And that's kind of an interior proof that we find in a number of the narratives that have surfaced. And I certainly commend Laura not only for coming forward, but in fact, in the context and content that she shared when she came forward, she didn't realize that she was literally proving the veracity of what she was saying, because she didn't know precisely what she was revealing, and that was it, the technical term for the jump rooms.
When you jump, do you go singularly, or do you have several people to go at the same time, or do you all meet there jumping for different times?
Well, I first went up in July of '81, and at that time, Mars, in its 26-month orbit around the sun, it's a regular orbit vis-a-vis our planet, was relatively distant from the Earth. And at that time, we were in the jump room for 20 minutes. So during that period in the early 80s, when I went up there about 40 times round trip, I don't know precisely exactly how many times I went up, but it was about 40 times, because I ultimately had a mission that I was completing over and over again, maybe about 30 times. So Mars was initially pretty distant from Earth, and then it began to draw closer to our planet, so that by the time I left the program in May of 1984, Mars was very close to Earth. It could even be seen in the night sky, and we were getting there in 8 minutes. That's, in fact, why my dad was approved to go. He had cardiac and pulmonary problems. He was a heart patient, and he wanted to go because he was part of the team. It was basically an effort of Hughes Aircraft, the Ralph M. Parsons Company of Pasadena, California, and Lockheed Skunk Works had developed the jump room technology, perhaps reverse engineering it from ET technology, perhaps after being given the technology by ETs. We don't know exactly the provenance of the jump room technology per se. But my dad wanted to go because he had helped pioneer teleportation for DARPA's Project Pegasus. His son had participated. I was the first American child to teleport. I had gone numerous times, and he, in fact, went on that May 1984 jump. We may have been the first father and son on Mars. I don't know. Oh. But he was able to go. My point being, he was able to go in May of '84 because the time inside the jump room at that point was only 8 minutes. So any of the issues of stress on the body, deprivation of oxygen, and so forth, they knew were going to be lesser because the time between Earth and Mars was reduced to 8 minutes by May of 1984.
In the movie Aliens, the colonist on LV was it 724? It didn't work out so well for them. Is that the colonists up on Mars? Did they ever interface with hostile aliens?
I never interfaced with hostile aliens. In fact, of the two Martian humanoids that are dominant, there's one that are related to us. They're the descendants of the Earthlings that were up there in antiquity. We call them Homo Martis Terris, or Earth people on Mars, Earth men and women on Mars. And then we call the indigenous Martians the more elfin, classical Martian, some of them even with an antennae coming out of their foreheads. We call them Homo Martis Martis, or Martian people.
Or Homo for short.
Now I interacted with the Earthling type, our cousins basically, at an air base in New Jersey in the summer of 1970, and they were in not just friendly but felicitous dealings with my dad. They were talking to him like they were old friends. So they were essentially fellow astronauts. Now, I did interact indirectly many times with the classical Martian type on Mars. One time, one of them met Courtney Hunt and I. Courtney was an old CIA officer who was attached to the Mars program and, in fact, had also previously been attached to Project Pegasus. And one of the Martians, per se, greeted us at the mouth of one of the jump rooms and took us on a tour of his part of the underground civilization. And that was a friendly interaction, although we had been told that conditions are so desperate on Mars that occasionally the Homo Martis Martis would attack an American astronaut and eat them, basically barbecue them, because of just to get protein. So we were always wary of the indigenous Martian type, although they never aggressed against me. I never saw them aggress against another American astronaut, and we were in pleasant dealings with both of those typologies.
Wow.
Friendly dealings.
Last time you were on the program, you discussed how that you said that Barack Obama was also went to the jump room and made a jump to Mars, but then when he became president, he just kind of, ignored the program and didn't give anybody credit for ever being there. Do you still feel the same way about it?
Well, he actually, I kind of have an issue with Obama. I mean, I'm a Washington Democrat, and he basically betrayed his comrades. It's a kind of a complicated story. But when he was attending Occidental College as Barry Soetoro, he was in our training class. He was in that summer of 1980 training class at College of the Siskiyous. And I got to know him as a colleague, not really that well. We were sequestered for a period of time working on the CIA's threat assessment about the Martian humanoid civilization. He was certainly a friendly guy and a bright guy, but I can't say I got to know him as a friend during that summer, but certainly as a friendly colleague. Mm-hmm. What happened was when I came forward, and then I brought my fellow jumpers, William Stillings and Bernard Mendez, who not only jumped with Obama, but were also in that same training class forward, beginning in 2010-11 timeframe, in a January 2012 edition of Wired magazine online, basically the online edition of Wired magazine, Wired.com, Obama ridiculed our account and even sort of subjected me to some public contempt when he said, well, this is just something that a secret chrononaut wants you to know. And that secret chrononaut was me. Wow. And I was one of the pioneers of time travel for the United States government and the United States civilization. So Obama basically publicly put not being tied to the CIA above telling the truth about his colleagues' courageous service. And I can't see a great president doing that. And that's what I said publicly. I couldn't see, for example, let's say John F. Kennedy had part responsibility for the PT-109 incident. I can't see him betraying his comrades in seeking a political safe harbor for what happened. But Obama did. He not only betrayed us by denying our account, he ridiculed me as one of America's time-space pioneers. So he's got some accounting to do. But privately, I mean, this story also has not really been told. Privately, through an intermediary, he told Bernard Mendez, one of our fellow jumper whistleblowers, the following. He said he remembered being in the program. He remembered me vividly because I was a very sort of loud personality during my college years, very outspoken individual. And yet his memories of the jump room program were vague and dreamlike. And that's something that all of the jumpers shared. So we felt that that was an honest account from Obama. He also stated, through an intermediary, that after leaving the White House, after leaving the presidency, he would come forward and reveal that he had been in the jump room program. Now, after being president, he might know more about what actually happened in the program. Maybe, for example, we weren't going to the actual Mars. Maybe we were going to another planetary domain, or as Bernard Mendez has theorized, a synthetic quantum environment of some kind. There are certainly a set of anomalies connected with the jump room program that caused me to remain open-minded about an alternate explanation. But when I say we were in the Mars jump room, we were trained by the CIA to go to Mars, and we were going to Mars. I mean, the Martian moons Phobos and Deimos were in the sky sometimes. You know what I mean? In other words, we went there.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Sure.
And so this is really, I think, an ultimate test of whether Barack Obama the truth of his own experience, because he indeed was one of the jumpers. And in fact, if you think about it, if we had been telling a tall tale, we certainly wouldn't have implicated the sitting president of the United States in our tale, because that would have lent incredulity. In other words, we had to come forward and reveal that Obama was one of the jumpers because he was. And the fact that we did come forward, I think, it's not a threat to the validity of our account. It affirms the validity of our account because it's such a difficult fact to have shared. It tends to not corroborate, but it tends to diminish the believability of our account. But we came forward because, indeed, he was one of the jumpers.
If somebody had the opportunity to go back in time, I think I think all of us think of a time and a place we'd like to go back to and to see. I would like to go back to see evolution, to see how everything started, to get the real story. But has anybody ever tried to go back in time to say Obama's birth and find out where he was really born?
I don't know if they were focusing on specific biographical details of the lives of presidents, but I can tell you something maybe more important and more significant, and that is that when time travel was emerging in Darpa's Project Pegasus in the early 70s, there was a widespread belief within the program that we shouldn't try to play God and start quantum engineering the future based on glimpses of it that we were receiving. One of the problems being that if you start trying to change the future based on the glimpses that you're getting, you basically diminish the value of the intelligence database about the future that you're collecting. So there was a programmatic reason not to play God and start taking information from the future and sharing it with people for strategic purposes and so forth. But in fact, one of the compromises they made over time is, I think because of the enormity, the psychological enormity of being president, they did decide to start apprising future presidents of their destiny as president. And I was at lunches for the Bushes and a separate lunch for Bill Clinton in the early 70s in New Mexico, shortly after they had been apprised that in the future they would serve as president. I know from my experiences 10 years later in the early 1980s in the Mars Jump Room program, including statements made by Ann Dunham, Obama's putative mother, at the going away dinner at the Creamery restaurant in Weed, California, when we were disbanding after our training in summer of 80, that he had also been briefed of his presidency, and I was briefed of my presidency by my father and Courtney Hunt in 1980 and then again in 2000. So if I don't win the presidency and I lose it because I've come forward as a whistleblower, I know at least I will have served the interests of the American people.
Andy,
but that's the reality we've been living in, Daniel, is one in which future presidents are being briefed on their destinies as president based on the U.S. government's quantum access capability.
Okay. Well, now it seemed like you framed that in the idea that somebody will go back in time to try to change something, but I suggest that could somebody go back in time to observe something? Say, observe the little Barry getting born, or such thing.
It could have
cute
been,
little guy. I bet he's a cute little guy too. You know what I'm saying?
It could have been done, but by the way, when you can't go back and change something.
No, but can you observe it though?
Yes, you can gather intelligence. Yes, okay. It could have happened, but I don't think. I think they just would have interviewed him. I don't think they would have put resources on that, but it could have been done, but I don't think it was.
Okay. When you jump to Mars, do you teleport or whatever the technical term that you would use, into a building, an underground base? I mean, are there cities there, domes?
It was really strange, and in fact, during the initial phase of my public career, I described all the different time travel technologies. In fact, Jesse Ventura said to me when we were filming Conspiracies, he said, Andy, I know you're very articulate explaining these various and sundry time travel technologies, but I want you to remember that when that red light goes on the camera, I'm not stupid, but I am from Minnesota. Okay, so by 2011 there, I think I had already established that I had described publicly all the various and sundry time travel technologies, but it was only after I was approached by William Stillings and Bernard Mendez, my fellow jumpers, that we then began piecing together what had happened in the Mars Jump Room program 10 years later in the early 80s, because clearly there had been made an effort had been made to block our memories.
All right.
And well, the time when the whistleblowers came forward, we were describing the jump room as teleporting, and I'm not sure we can even say that. What was happening was we were going into an elevator. That elevator on the West Coast was the main elevator in the center of the building at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, a building then owned and occupied by Hughes Aircraft. Mm-hmm. And essentially we would check in on the 5th floor, go back into the elevator, go up to the 8th floor, which is the top floor of that building still today, and it would essentially begin morphing from a box into a cylinder. And it was just grinding stress. I mean, it was just impossibly nauseating as the whole elevator twisted from a box into a cylinder. Wow. And then untwisted. Now, when that untwisting occurred, about 5 minutes later, the far wall opened up, and we were in the sub-basement of a U.S. facility on Mars or some other planet. Clearly, we were not on Earth. So it's really hard to describe. It's imagine being in an elevator that morphs into a cylinder and then back again, and it transports you in that process. That's what was happening.
You mentioned Bill Clinton and them. There's a lot of chatter on the internet that a lot of the high-ranking officials in government and the entertainment industry, probably in an NFL league too, eating children or just basically molesting them, pedophilia, that type of thing. Is that going on? Have you seen any of that in any teleportation? Are they molesting kids up on Mars or anything?
There was no nexus between pedophilia phenomenon and either my time travel experiences in the early 70s or my Mars experiences in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. But in the mid-80s, I participated in a joint NSA Interpol operation to shut down the abduction network. And what I learned is that the problem was really out of control. Children were being abducted in great number. They were being sold to the Saudi regime. They were being sold to people engaging them in prostitution in the different prostitution entrepôts of the world, Amsterdam and Bangkok and so forth. They were being sold to snuff film manufacturers, to Satanists to be involved in satanic murders, satanic ritual sacrifices. So I'm proud to say that I did undoubtedly save the lives and prevented a number of children from fates worse than death by participating in that policing action in the mid-'80s under Reagan Bush to shut down the abduction networks.
Well, that's great, but I always thought that Bush had a part in that too. All right, we've got a few questions. Let's get to them just kind of off the cuff here. Somebody asks, do you consider Obama an alien?
No, I consider him a cool black guy from Hawaii.
Okay, yeah, and and that's the problem, because during the 2012 election. Hillary Clinton, she thought, in 2016, she thought that she got to be the cool black guy, but she couldn't, and nobody liked her. And well, by the way, did you support her?
Well, no, in being there, the Chauncey Gardner character, I think Obama is kind of a Chauncey Gardner character in the sense that there's no limit which you can rise in life as long as you remain relaxed. That would be my statement about Obama. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama was the most relaxed person I've ever met. He simply was not capable of getting tense about hardly anything, except one time we did have to coax him out of one of the jump rooms on Mars. I can't say I saved his life on Mars, but I certainly protected him on Mars by getting him out of that damn jump room. He was just spooked when we went up in a particular kind of jump room about exiting the jump room.
So it seemed like did he put it on his mom's jeans when he went to the jump room, or?
Did he do what?
Did he put his mom's jeans on? Because I usually, you kind of see him when he's relaxed, they say that he wears mom jeans. I just want to know if that helped him calm down,
No, he was always kind of dressed in a slightly preppy way. He was a serious young man.
Okay, good for him.
He was intelligent but not brilliant. He was friendly but not really that political or self-aggrandizing. He was pretty much a study in just a studious young person.
Okay.
When you meet these people at that age, because I ran into Hillary in summer of '69 at a public campground in Maine when she had just completed her studies at Wellesley. I guess what I would say is that when you meet some of these political principles of our time, as younger people, you realize that there's really no limit to the extent to which anybody can go who's properly motivated. Because I think what you encounter mediocrities who do something with their lives, and that's kind of instructive for all of us. Mm-hmm. But no, he was an okay guy.
Cool.
You know, he's a pretty normal person.
Okay. All right. When he didn't have his bodyguards with him. Hey, somebody in the live chat want to know, did you ever take pictures up there on Mars?
Yes. In fact, Bernard Mendez took pictures of, I was in 2 teams initially. I did a couple of practice jumps, first by myself, then with Courtney Hunt. And then there were like about 10 jumps where I was in these teams of 3. I was under a team under Courtney Hunt with William Stillings, and we went up about 5 times. And I also did about 5 jumps with Bernard Mendez as the senior officer with Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama. In those 5 jumps with Bernard Mendez leading Obama and I, pictures of both of us, including us together, were taken on Mars. So I don't know if I'm going to become president. I was told I'm also going to reach the presidency, but Obama already has. Mm-hmm. So those are historic photographs because they reveal a future American president on Mars, perhaps 2, and they verify my claims. So Bernard Mendez took photographs of Obama and I during that time when the 3 of us were teamed in the 1982-83 time frame.
Where are those pictures now?
They would presumably be in some locker in the CIA. I mean, the CIA's got, 13 archives around the world, 13 major libraries. Well, they're somewhere, wherever the documents for the jump room are housed. I'm sure they weren't destroyed.
Yeah.
There was also, let me say this, Daniel, I just realized. There was also a photograph taken by William Stillings' father, Tom Stillings, of Lockheed in the hotel room at the Finlandia Motel in Mount Shasta, California. And that photograph shows me standing. It shows Barack Obama in the middle of the room, sitting down with his hands leaning back on his hands. And across the room, it shows Regina Dugan looking at the photographer. She's sitting in a chair on the side of the room, like with a cup of water in her hands. Okay, that photograph was shown to me by Tom Stillings after he took it. It was like a Polaroid Instamatic type photograph. There was also a group photograph taken of that training class. So there were photographs taken that, if discovered today, would verify our claims of being trained in 1980 at College of the Siskiyou.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Question from Doc out of the live chat asks, was there any attempts to ever see the Titanic or any type of historical event like that?
No, but they were studying historical events because one of the things they were doing was, for example, studying the lives of historical notables about whom much was recorded during their lifetime. Individuals like Jesus of Nazareth, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and then comparing the images that they were recovering via chronovisor with the historical record. That's why they sent me back to view the Lincoln assassination 7 or 8 times, because they wanted to see whether what I saw corresponded with what history recorded. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if the Titanic disaster itself was recorded, but that's a very intelligent question when you think about filmmakers like Spielberg and Cameron and so forth in films like Lincoln and Titanic and so forth, because I felt, having been sent to Lincoln's time a number of times, I was sent in summer of 1971, I was repeatedly sent to 1865 to witness his assassination. And in spring of 72, I was sent once to the Gettysburg Address site of 1863. And I can say that Spielberg's Lincoln certainly looked to me like some of the scenes may have been reconstructed based on chronovisor images of Lincoln's life and presidency. So yes, specific historical events and notable people were intentionally being studied via chronovision, including sending American chrononauts to those events to witness them, and I participated in some of that.
Mm-hmm. So you were selected for the Lincoln assassination. So is it different? Jumpers are selected for different events?
Well, I was being relied upon because I was a very bright kid, very intuitive. I had a great memory. I was very specific in the details that I would give when I was being debriefed. I would answer, even though I was just a grammar school kid, I was answering my debriefing questions in whole sentences. They really valued my ability to go to a location, see what was going on, and then remember what I had seen and report it back accurately. In fact, that's one of the reasons they were using kids, because kids' perceptions are not colored by the selection bias that they're endowed with by their previous experience. The example they used, if they sent a kid to a street in Los Angeles in the year 2200, and the child viewed somebody walking down the street with a holster, if they sent an adult there, the adult would say, yeah, there was a man walking down the street with a holster with a gun in it. Mm-hmm. But the child would say, there was a man walking down the street with this holster-like device with a scientific instrument in it. Okay? In other words, kids see what's really there, not what they think they're seeing,
right,
not what they think they should be seeing. So that's, in fact, one of the reasons we were used, was that we were tabula rasa. We were seeing what was actually there rather than what our mind was telling us was there. And intelligence is the reason that the program had been launched, to gather new intelligence about the past and future.
Do you have any religious affiliation?
I'm a non-denominational Christian. I mean, I'd like to say that there was really never any reason for me to be born again, because I saw Jesus' crucifixion, and as we exited the room, my dad described his team filming his resurrection. So I believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. I've stated that publicly. I don't really like to advance my religious views because I respect the separation of church and state. I was raised just conventionally as a Catholic, left the church at age 17. I always felt there was somewhat of a mind control element in Catholicism. But I believe in, I pray to Jesus. I pray for his intercession when I pray. And I'm a believer. And I like to say that, I'm a believer with an IQ of 168. Bright people can believe in Jesus too.
Wow.
One of them.
Well, that's good news there. So you don't have to be born again. So how do you look at your eternal soul? Where's it going?
I understand the concept. I'm just saying that it's like I had a unique set of experiences in childhood where I needed to rely on God. Okay. I was time traveling as a kid. I had to get my mind around the fact that anywhere I was sent, God had already been. Mm-hmm. And then when I had the opportunity as a 10-year-old to see the film of Jesus being crucified and witness his suffering, and then come out of the room and have my dad reveal to our companion Connie Chavez and I that his team had also captured similar scenes of the resurrection of Jesus, I never really had an opportunity or a need to be born again, because it's like I was already there. You see what I mean? I already understood that Jesus was the Son of God. And that he had died for our sins. I saw him dying for our sins. It was hideous. It was hideous. It was difficult to watch. Watching Jesus' crucifixion, it was such an evil event. I felt that it was almost as if there was a swarm of hornets or something in the middle of the room, wasps. There was almost like a physical presence of evil in the room when we were watching that.
Does Jesus look like the classical painting that we've seen for all these years?
He looked more like a Gentile than Jewish, I can say that. He had dark hair. He was very emaciated at the time of his crucifixion. Mm-hmm. He had essentially what I would describe as sort of mildly handsome European looks. And he had a very full beard, and the crown of thorns was very large. It was like the size of a large motorcycle helmet, and it was crushed down over his head, and there were rivulets of blood running from his forehead into the side of his eye and then down to the corners of his mouth. He suffered greatly on the cross. I wouldn't wish what he suffered on my worst enemy. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. It still affects me. Mm-hmm. I kind of wish I hadn't been shown it, but I know what Jesus looked like, and I can point to specific pictures that, in fact, the BBC mock-up was not that far off. In fact, the Jim Caviezel depiction of Jesus in Mel Gibson's film, The Passion, was not that far off, although Jim Caviezel is a little bit more handsome than Jesus was. Jesus had a little bit more of a mild-mannered look than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Am I more handsome than Jim?
Sorry, Daniel, no.
Crap, I had my chance, man.
I'm just saying that Jesus, right. I know what Jesus looked like, and I can say that it's striking that some of the depictions in art seem to have come down to us through some kind of mystery school that had eyewitness accounts or something, because some of them are extremely close. It makes you wonder whether they had chronovisors in which they recapitulated the event, because some of the artistic depictions of Jesus have been spot on. He looked sort of like a mildly handsome Spaniard would today. He looked European. He looked Christian, not Jewish. And he didn't have, let me say that if you look at the Shroud of Turin image, where you get like this very blocky kind of Semitic head, he didn't look like that. He didn't have this thick face that you find in the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, didn't have a square head.
He had finer features than that. But he was... Yeah.
Okay. We're getting ready to go to break here at the top of the hour, but real quick question. Are you going to run for office in 2020?
Well, I kind of thank my lucky stars that I didn't experience President Trump's fate, because he's just being attacked from all quarters. My position is that I will run if it's appropriate, if he needs to be replaced. And right now, I don't feel he does. I feel that there's, in all likelihood, a Mossad plot in place to destroy his presidency. I got wind of that one of the first steps he took was to investigate the relationship between Israel and principal countries that could be counted among its enemies. And there's been an Israeli plot in place to destroy his presidency. I think he may be compromised in some of his business dealings in terms of the actual financial holdings he has in Russia and the Baltic states, but because he's independent, my position on Trump has been, of all the other people running when I ran, I kind of related to him the most, because I felt, well, for two reasons. I felt he was independent, and I felt he was trying to speak the truth as he understood it, which is what I lead with. And so if I feel he's trying to do right by the country, I won't try to take his job away. That wouldn't be appropriate. I'll wait. I'm not that old. I'm only 56. I can wait until 2024 if I feel, if I sit down with my advisors and we say, well, let's give, President Trump another 4 years. So I'm not predisposed right now to discuss it. First of all, because there's a custom in American presidential politics that there's a grace period where you really let the new president, occupy the office and have a presidency uncolored by electioneering. So I would say no comment, because I don't think it's appropriate to comment so soon as to whether I'm going to run or not. But if I feel he's trying to do right by the country, I'm not going to challenge him. I'm not a partisan. I am a registered Democrat, but I support the man, not the party. And I think, in fact, the parties should be eliminated. In fact, that's one of my 100 proposals is, the parties are really the fulfillment of the faction that was addressed in the Federalist Papers.
Well, it's odd, Andy, that you describe yourself as a Washington Democrat, yet you don't want to see any harm come to Donald Trump, which pretty much describes every Democrat in the country.
Not me.
Wow.
I think he should be given a fair chance at being president. I feel that very early I got wind of the Mossad operation to destroy his presidency, that they viewed him as an enemy of the Israeli state. And I'm not going to start tying it into other events, but he's had a tough row. I mean, look what he's confronted: the potential for a nuclear war with North Korea, massive disasters, and these massive, whether they're false flags or not, these massive public events, these shootings that are just hideous. So, I mean, he's had a very difficult first year, and I feel that he's owed the respect of his office, and that it would be inappropriate for me to say, well, he's doing a bad job, so I'm going to replace him 4 years from now.
All right, Andy, listen.
I hope he does a great job, regardless of party.
Okay.
And I support him.
All right, and listen, we're at the
He's
top.
my president.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. We take a 5-minute break. Anything you'd like to say about your website, which I have in my background, or anything you'd like to say right now before we go to break?
Well, I've gotten involved in the prosperity movement, and I'm supporting a company called USI because USI is bringing the high volume trading that has been the province of big banks and the super rich for the last 10 years to everyday investors. So now everyday investors can enjoy extraordinary profits. Mm-hmm. And so my link to sponsoring others, to registering others in USI so they can as well, is ADB, that's my initials, Alpha Delta Bravo, .USI tech, TECH, .info. I would seriously urge your listeners to take a look at this movement to start involving everyday people in the highly profitable, high volume trading that has led to the gross misallocation of money over the last 10 years.
Okay, we've got the link in your bio section, and Jay just put that link in our live chat. Andy Basiago, just stay on the line, and we're going to turn you down. We'll be back with you in 5 minutes, all right?
Great, thank you.
All right, everybody, you're listening to or watching the Edge television broadcast. On our Newsmaker line is Andrew Basiago, and we'll be back with him in 5 minutes. We'll be right back. Exciting first hour of this broadcast. We'll begin to replay in our main player directly after the show. We'll put it up in our YouTube channel. We'll podcast it and put it into our TuneIn Radio playlist. TuneIn Radio, which we are simulcasting right now, plays our programming 24 hours a day. It will run on any device and any platform. Now let's go back to our Newsmaker line and let's welcome back 2016 presidential candidate Andrew Basiago and astronaut right back on the program. Andy, welcome back.
Thank you, Daniel.
Well, if you had your choice of an event that you'd like to see, obviously you said in the first hour that you were a sort of assigned or picked for the Lincoln assassination there, or the Gettysburg Address, both of them, I don't know, guess both of them, but which event would you like to see yourself?
Well, I mean, there's many events in history that would be auspicious. You know, certainly the building of the pyramid, that comes up a lot, but the three most remarkable things that I experienced in the program were seeing the crucifixion of Jesus, meeting George Washington and advising him to retreat from New York Harbor, which I was sent on because they saw me briefing him when they recovered the chronovisor images of that part of his generalship during the Revolution. And then actually an encounter I had with Jim Morrison of the Doors at a bar in Albuquerque was also kind of remarkable because Jim was the only adult that I encountered during those 4 years when I was time traveling for the government, who by interacting with me like I had a brain in my head, discerned that I was time traveling. And it's an amazing thing. And in fact, I had held back that encounter and the Washington story because I was afraid people were just going to go, "Oh, this guy's making this up." But the problem is I had a remarkable set of experiences, and they included those three. So those are the three that were most memorable. I mean, there's many epochs in history that one could go back and it certainly would be remarkable to see how the pyramids were made and how they were functioning when they were fully operational. That would certainly solve a lot of mysteries because of course that's still in dispute.
Andy, what do you think that the pyramids were built for? Obviously, they're that structural alignment on Mars. I mean, so what do you think they were built for, or how would you even think that they were built?
I don't know how they were built, but I think they were power plants. I know that granite is extremely conductive, and the large pyramids were all built on huge deposits of granite. And in fact, if you go into the mystery raised by David Paulides regarding the pattern of missing people in the national park system, he talks about the significance of Yosemite and of Crater Lake. Well, what do we find in Yosemite? He even talks about people going missing right there at the front of the trailhead in Yosemite, not out in the boonies, but right there, right in the national park entry to that middle 5% of Yosemite where everybody does most of the hiking. Well, what's the commonality there is granite, and granite is highly conductive. So I think people may be going missing because they're being portalized into another dimension or disintegrated by transient EM discharges in granite deposits. So I think the pyramids were power plants. And they were a way to draw electricity out of granite deposits that they were based on.
Let me ask you something. I think it was 1850, the Stars and Stripes, I believe that was the periodical, had an article about George Washington and an angelic visit that he was showing the future of the country. Do you lend any credence to that story?
Well, George Washington seeing the future of the country is an elaboration of George Washington encountering angels during the Revolution. And the folkloric story of him encountering angels during the Revolution was his elaboration and the elaboration of others about our visit, because he kept on asking me, surely you boys must be angels. And then when we were standing at the top of the grassy swale, as his soldiers were coming up from New York Harbor to Brooklyn Heights there on their way to Manhattan, every fourth or fifth guy would step out of line and go, are you the boys that told General Washington that we need to retreat? Are you angels? So there was already scuttlebutt among his troops that angels had advised him to order the retreat, and we were those angels. So I attribute the folkloric stories of Washington encountering angels during the Revolution possibly to our presence, but he certainly believed that we were angels. He couldn't understand what I meant by time travelers from his own future.
One of the deep rabbit holes that's appeared on the internet these days is something called the Mandela effect, which involves changing time or events. Do you lend any credence to that, the Mandela effect? Is that real?
I've even researched, I went all the way back to kindergarten in terms of researching my life experiences, because I've been involved in defense technical activities involving time travel at such a young age. I actually first teleported at age 6 in winter of 1968. And I verified the Mandela effect as having happened a number of times in my life. In other words, there's periods that seem to be threads of activity in my life that when I later went back and correlated them with others, they had to have involved taking place in another timeline. So I have two theories. One is I believe we experience the Mandela effect when we bank into an alternate timeline and then bank back onto this one.
Okay.
So a classic example of this is the number of people who remember the death of actor Richard Chamberlain and how it was in People magazine. And I remember that. I remember reading about his death in People magazine in a Ralph's grocery store in Los Angeles, California. Okay, so that had to involve physically banking into another timeline because I was reading about his passing in a magazine that I was physically holding. Okay?
All right.
The other thing that I think that's causing the Mandela effect is when information from other dimensions permeates this dimension. So, for example, a number of people living in Los Angeles in the late 90s remember hearing the National Public Radio obituary for reporter John Hockenberry. I'm one of them. I've spoken to 3 or 4 other people who remember hearing that of John's death. Well, John is still, fortunately, very much alive and reporting. So that could have occurred. There was a big electric storm over Los Angeles when John Hockenberry's obituary was played by NPR. So that could have been, that could have caused that event to permeate this dimension as a result of, let's say, a radio broadcast in an adjacent dimension permeating this dimension as a result of the electric storm. So those would be my 2 leading explanations for the Mandela effect. We either bank physically into an alternate timeline or information from different forms of media and so forth in adjacent timelines permeates this one.
Okay. All right. Question from our live chat. I said, did DARPA, the question is, Andy, did DARPA get the technology from Telsa or the ETs?
There was a major Tesla component. My father, Jack Pruitt, and Dr. Robert Beckwith all spoke of that debt of gratitude that DARPA owed Tesla, and that was in the teleportation technology primarily.
Okay. All right, another question said, did you ever, this is from Cleet out of the live chat, there were a number of our questions coming from tonight. Did you ever walk on the surface of Mars? And if so, did it have a breathable atmosphere as others have reported?
Yes, I did about 40 round trips to Mars. I walked on its surface. I breathed its air. Initially, I brought a respirator. I didn't need that respirator during my first jump, and I never brought it back again. I was always unassisted and did not need oxygen there, but the oxygen there was extremely limited. It would be about where the oxygen levels are at about 14,000 feet in elevation on Earth. namely climbing Mount Everest. It was very, very thin in terms of its oxygen supply. And as a result, I would always get screaming pains from hypoxia in my leg muscles, particularly in the muscles of my thighs and calves, after about 2 hours on the surface. But there is, on the other hand, there is enough oxygen on Mars so that it has blue skies. And I had testified to that fact before Mars Anomalous then uncovered unretouched NASA photographs showing its blue skies.
So the movie Total Recall was pretty accurate.
I didn't see it, but I can say that Mars has blue skies, and that's been verified by findings made by Paul Goodwin in the United Kingdom, by Andrew R. Steck in this country. Different Mars Anomalous did find some of the unretouched NASA photographs showing its pale blue skies.
All right. Another question for you. Have you, or do you watch a TV show called Timeless?
No, I don't really watch very much television because I find it very, very boring. I watch the Olympics. I watch the presidential debates. I watch 60 Minutes occasionally the News Hour or some kind of news program. But I'm not really a denizen of episodic television, so I must confess that I haven't seen a single episode of.
Good for you. Good for you. Neither am I. By the way, just an aside, are you a football fan?
No.
Didn't think so.
I'm not a sports fan. I think if there's any sport that I like watching, though, I like professional basketball. But it's not a big thing.
Well, you must know. You must know. I want to know. I want to know. Andrew Basago's take on the NFL players taking the knee all the time during the national anthem. I mean, you've been a patriotic individual such as yourself, running for president of the United States, which would seem to be the most patriotic office in the land. Do you agree with what they do?
I would say this. I would say that if you look at the history of our time, as baby boomers, there's a lot of people who have served the country like me who were never paid. And I think the people involved in these protests really appreciate the privilege of playing sports and having the riches of an affluent society showered on them. So I support people's right to protest. I don't support our national anthem being used as a device to protest because, look, if we don't agree on our basic dedication to this country, it's pointless to agree on anything else. So there has to be basic respect for the flag, for the national anthem, for the Pledge of Allegiance, just because at the end of the day, we all are Americans. But at the same time, I think that the black community has really been languishing under a set of social conditions that are intolerable. So I understand the origin of protest among young blacks in professional athletics, and I wouldn't seek to censor it. But I would say, I would just, from my unique life experience, I would say, appreciate the fact your lives have been protected, indeed saved, by people whose names you usually don't know until somebody like me comes forward as a whistleblower. Had I not come forward and shared my experiences serving this country, I would have been one of those unnamed people for whom you can credit being able to sleep at night without dying. Okay? So I think that we should, in fact, that we have been served. People are free to protest and even desecrate the flag or the national anthem, and then they just glibly criticize people, let's say, who have served in the military or the intelligence community or the Defense Department. Well, I think we should be more thankful because, in fact, many of the people who have served us and allowed us to entertain our protests haven't even been paid. I mean, I went to Mars 40 times and I was paid twice. I was paid like $34, and I'm not kidding. This is how ridiculous. I was paid $55. Okay, by a government agency called the Department of Naval Intelligence, not the office, but the Department of Naval Intelligence. The only other place I've been able to find that agency is in Robert Lazar's account. Okay, yes, I would say that in protesting, appreciate the fact that not just your freedom, but your very life has been won by fellow Americans who, in the highest expression of patriotism, have served in these secret projects and not even been paid. And you're being paid, you're becoming a multi-millionaire for pushing a basketball through a hoop.
Well, that does it right there, Andy. I was going to sign up for the jump program, but this old cowboy is not going up there to kick alien ass for no $34. Okay, no, I'm worth a hell of a lot more than that.
No, don't do it.
All right, here's
You're
a question.
A young man, Daniel.
Okay, that's true. I'm only like 20. Doug White out of the live chat asked this question: does the Catholic Church have a chronovisor?
The Catholic Church originated chronovision because Ernetti and Gemelli were two Vatican musicologists who at the Catholic University of Milan in the 1940s were studying the harmonic patterns in Gregorian chants when they were manipulating a specialized microphone and accidentally found that they had captured the signal of something that Gemelli's father said to him in childhood. And then they partnered with Enrico Fermi, the great Italian nuclear physicist, and evolved chronovision so that by 1952 they had a flat screen TV-like chronovisor. So yes, the chronovisor technology that we were working with in Project Pegasus was Vatican in origin. In fact, I can testify to the fact that Father Ernetti himself visited as a guest of honor the chronovisor array at Morristown, New Jersey, when I was standing on the stage as a chronovisor. So I can personally testify with my own eyes to the Vatican origin of the chronovisor technology.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not sure if the Catholic Church has a chronovisor, but I certainly know they got a molestivisor. Probably most of them got that device. All right, here's another question. It says, have you ever went back in time and met yourself? I think we asked that last show.
Yes. I was sent, as I mentioned, 7 or 8 times to see Who Shot Lincoln, and during my second or third jump there to Ford's Theater on April 14th of 1865, I was walking through the theater, and I thought I was looking at myself on a hallway mirror over on my right, and then I walked to the right off the wall, and I realized I was looking at myself. And then during a later jump, my 6th or 7th jump, I then saw myself over on my left. So yes, during 2 different probes to the same time-space location, the same evening of April 14th, 1865, in Washington, D.C., I saw myself in Ford's Theater.
Were you enjoying the show?
No, I was walking through the theater. I was just walking from one part of the theater to the other. I didn't see the play. I was focused on sneaking up the stairs up to Lincoln's balcony seating and trying to see who shot him.
Are you the one that pushed Booth over the edge there and broke his leg?
No, I didn't change the event in any way.
Well, I did. Somebody. I mean, he did break his leg, so I figured maybe you tripped him.
I think he leapt over and then shouted "Sic Semper Tyrannis." But I did see the Lincolns coming into the theater, and I could say that Mr. Lincoln was extremely emaciated. We now believe that he was dying of cancer. He was extremely sick. He was stoop-shouldered and skinny and just very fragile. Even though he was my current age, we all experienced the gradual onset of being an elder, of aging. But Mr. Lincoln was very old at 56. He looked more like he was 86.
How do we know that none of the jumpers, Andy, have attempted to change history?
Well, you can't change history because if you're a time traveler from the future and you're there before or during the event you're trying to change, you're originally contributing to it, so you don't change it. You see how that falls together?
Yeah.
You're there when it originally happened because you were sent to the past event. So you can't change it. You can only either have no effect or have an effect, and that effect creates the past that we know. But so you can't change it by being sent to the past. That's the paradox.
Okay. Kevin out of the live chat has this question: have you met any spirits or entities in the jump process, or maybe in your own personal life?
Yes, I've done public lectures. I've done it 4 times now. I've given my lecture about my encounters with multidimensionals. In fact, my health kind of worsened after I began giving that lecture, and I've gotten away from telling it because, I was warned by Dr. Eldon Bird that when you go in search of the paranormal comes in search of you.
Ooh.
So I've kind of backed off of that lecture, but I gave it 4 times in different states. In fact, I've given in Washington, in Texas, and in Missouri. My contacts with multidimensionals. Yes, that's a very intelligent question because, in fact, accessing time-space in the ways that we were was causing us to have knock-on effects involving ghosts, involving goblins, and so forth. I've seen a number of ghosts. Yeah, so
Okay.
we were definitely encountering beings that exist in those realms. So that really was part of the experience.
Has any ghost attempted to jump to Mars?
There's just some questions I don't think you'd expect me to answer, Daniel.
That was a test, man. It's a psychological test right there, man. But you passed with flying colors there. Good job. No, I mean, seems to me, there's no. Look, there's clearly spooks here on Earth. I just wondering if there's spooks on Mars.
Mars has been described as the Halloween planet for good reason. It's a scary place. But I didn't see any apparitions there. No.
Right now, if we had a high-powered telescope, say like the Vatican does, and zoomed in on Mars, would we see those cities?
Well, I don't remember cities there. I mean, there was habitation there. There were structures, but
where's 550,000 people supposed to be?
I mean, again, that's not my testimony.
No, you didn't. I know what you didn't say it was. You said some have said, well, between 40 and 500. That's quite a variation there. But is there any activity on Mars? Should we see it
by individuals like David Wilcock? David Wilcock testified in January of 2010 that the Mars colony now numbers 550,000 people. Mm-hmm. I just have no way of contributing to that discussion because I left in 1984, 33 years ago. But I can say this, and that is that with the jump room technology, we would have been able to put that many people up there by now, easily, just in 15-minute increments, just 2 and 3 people at a time every 15 minutes, easily.
Well, okay. If we zoomed in on the moon, should we see the moon rover still sitting there?
I don't address the moon because I've had no involvement with the moon.
Mm-hmm. Is there
the closest I've gotten to the lunar program is that my dad initially had been scheduled to do the instrumentation for the lunar module, but then that contract went to Grumman rather than Parsons.
Oh.
Also met Buzz Aldrin the day before I was dropped into Mars jump room training in August of 1980. That's the closest I've come to the moon. I never went there. I had one component in Project Pegasus on Project Moondust, which was the idea of like sending space capsules up there and then burying the fuselage of the rocket, making a habitat out of it, and that sort of stuff. But I was not trained for the moon and never went there and have almost nothing to contribute to the discussion.
When you did jump to Mars, there was obviously somewhere where you went. Is any of that infrastructure still there?
What infrastructure?
Was there not when you landed on Mars? Was there something there that you went to, or you just walked around on the surface?
There were buildings that housed the receiving elevator shaft.
Okay.
Some of them were like mine shafts, and some of them were, like a small insurance building you might find in any city USA.
So is that something we could could we zoom in on that if we had a powerful telescope?
Presumably, yes. In fact, those investigating that can start by doing 20-mile circles around the Viking 2 site, because the jumping facility that we called the Corkscrew, in front of that facility one day, Courtney Hunt of the CIA informed William B. Stillings and I, my fellow jumper, as was Courtney, of course, that the Viking 2 apparatus was about 20 miles, and he pointed in a specific distance from the front of that conch shell shaped jump room facility. So if somebody starts scribing 20-mile circles around the Viking 2 location, they might find the jump room facility known as the Corkscrew.
Andy, if you were to jump back in time and say somebody shoots you, you really couldn't die, could you? Because you existed in the future in order to be able to jump to the past. So wouldn't you be immortal?
No, you can go back in the past and be killed. You would then just be a missing person in the present. But if you're now in the present, you're saying that the time travel to the past is a fait accompli, it's something you've done in your own life experience, then it's just axiomatic that you survived it because you're now alive.
Well, you had to be alive in the future in order to go back in the past. So it just seems to me that you could not be killed on that basis.
If you're alive in the future, then you weren't killed in any of your life experience, including your experience going to the past.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
That's
So if say, if say you're in a war, somebody blasts you or something, you can't be killed because you existed in the future to even come back there. So there's no way you could have been killed. So wouldn't it mean that it's impossible to be killed in the past?
Yes, in the sense that if you're now dealing with the data point of the person being alive in the present, that can be a way to say this party will survive their time travel. And in fact, we think that may have been the reason that known future notables like Obama, like Bashago, like Dugan were selected for the jump room program because they were worried about the casualties that were occurring. So they may have taken the fact that they knew about us becoming notables in the future to drop us into the jump room program, knowing that we would survive our experiences.
Stan Dale has a sort of a similar testimony of what you're describing. Have you ever met him?
I think I've exchanged emails with Stan Dale. I've communicated with a lot of people, but what's really strange is that when sort of like the House whistleblowers describe this area, they always omit me. But I think I've shared the most about time travel and Mars at this point. And it would be nice to earn a comment from a Robert David Steele. I was just listening to him yesterday with Carrie Cassidy. I've shared a lot of information and done a lot of interviews, and I've communicated personally with a lot of paranormal investigators. I think with Stan Dale, but years ago.
So you've done these things. Obviously these are sort of secret happenings. Has the government ever came to you and said, Andy, you can't be revealing our secret space jump program or not? They don't care?
Yes. In June of 2003, I had been investigating my experiences for 3 or 4 years, and I was directed into a set of meetings in New Mexico and Southwest Colorado by a friend of mine who was a college professor who had a close personal friend who was a lieutenant commander for the Office of Naval Intelligence with liaison to CIA. And they opened up a number of meetings between me and different people at CIA. And the final meeting took place up at the abandoned, naturally it was June, the abandoned Wolf Creek Pass Ski Lodge up in Southwest Colorado. And there, a representative of the Executive Office of the President told me that Project Pegasus existed. It involved the derivation of time travel technologies, and I was in it, so I could stop asking whether I was crazy or not by remembering what had happened in the program. But that the Bush White House wanted me to know that if I didn't stop investigating, talking about, or writing about the time travel technologies that were involved in Project Pegasus, that the Bush administration, could not guarantee my survival. I think what must have happened is they must have known that a certain faction within the military or something probably had been assigned to assassinate whistleblowers regarding the time travel technology or something like that, because it was more of a warning than a threat. Or it was a Strange-Lovian statement from the Rumsfeld Defense Department. I don't know which, but it was either a threat or a warning. But they basically told me
right there
to back off, to knock it off.
When they talk about
when
you talk about the Project Pegasus, I mean, in Greek mythology, that's a flying horse is. What's the connection there? Calling that program Pegasus.
Well, in Greek mythology, Pegasus soars up to Mount Olympus, right, to the peak of Mount Olympus. What was explained to us when we were trained is that they were calling it Pegasus just to give it a sort of a fanciful name. Usually project descriptors are arbitrary to protect project secrecy, to protect what's called operational security, like let's say the A-bomb project being called Project Manhattan, just arbitrarily the name of a district in New York City. Okay, so, but yet they called Project Pegasus because the technologies would, in a sense, be taking us into realms that we otherwise wouldn't be accessing. We would metaphorically be going to the peak of Mount Olympus. We would be experiencing things beyond the rainbow, so to speak.
Somebody wrote in the live chat, asked that when you deal or when you have dealt with entities of any kind, is there any sort of test that you give them to see if they're sort of, hey, want to do damage to you or they're lying to you in any way? How do you confirm whether they're good or bad?
I didn't have enough contact with any of the multidimensionals I've had contact with to souse that out, but I've had the hell scared out of me a couple of times. I've had some really vivid encounters with ghosts, for example, that others have witnessed.
Let's hear one. What
my father and I saw the ghost of a Confederate soldier on the Shiloh battlefield in Tennessee in 1972.
All right.
And then on the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo campus in 1993, one of my graduate school colleagues and I witnessed the ghost of a female who was a murder victim in the Central Coast going back to the 1880s. So I have seen some really vivid ghosts. I don't know if I was predisposed to see them as a result of serving in Project Pegasus and going back to the past, but it's almost as if that's in fact what happened.
Does the CERN Hadron Collider have anything to do with the technology that you describe?
Only in the sense that, people have made statements that when the CERN tries to access other dimensions, they're somehow going to destabilize the quantum hologram. And in fact, again, for some reason I'm citing Carrie Cassidy a lot today, but Carrie stated in her interviews with Dan Burrish, back when she was doing interviews under Project Camelot with Bill Ryan, that the chronovisors, she was calling them looking glass devices because Dan Burrish was, that the looking glass devices destabilized the quantum hologram. I learned nothing of that when I was serving on Pegasus. I do not believe that occurred, but I think it's certainly provocative and entirely irresponsible. And I certainly concur with Dr. Stephen Hawking's position that we shouldn't be propagating black holes. My God. Imagine getting our current planetary civilization stuck in the event horizon of a black hole. That would be a mass catastrophe of irrevocable magnitude.
I'm trying to think of a question where I can put in that new word I got called a molestivisor, but I really can't think of one right now. Andy, what are you currently doing? What are you working on? What do you do?
I'm a lawyer in Washington State. I'm admitted at the federal and state level. I'm a member of the Washington State Bar Association and the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. I've supported myself during my entire truth campaign by representing people and as a criminal defense lawyer, doing their family law problems, drafting their estate plans, basically lawyering. I lawyer for a living. And I had one small grant several years ago, but otherwise I've funded this whole campaign. And both my presidential campaign and my truth campaign about time travel. So I support myself as a lawyer. And recently I got involved with USI because when I was running for president, I mean, I'm sure you would agree with this as somebody in media that really the number one social problem in this country is that nobody has any money. Everybody talks about these goals that we would achieve with our money, right? But how can we achieve goals on behalf of all of society when everybody's struggling to make ends meet and nobody has enough money at the end of the month, right? So I began to realize that the problem of the over-concentration of wealth, what I call the monumental monopolization of money, is really America's number one domestic problem. And so I began, when I was running for president back in 2016, I was asking myself, are any of these companies that are helping the super rich get super richer, are any of them turning their formula around and trying to help ordinary people participate in the high volume, high velocity trading of the major currency exchanges, for example? And I found one. I found that in October of last year, a company called USI started a subsidiary called USI Tech, in which they're doing precisely that. They're involving everyday people in the high velocity trading. I mean, with this high velocity trading, Daniel, they can do thousands of trades in an hour. The artificial intelligence that governs these software programs that do the trading can analyze financial opportunities and transact the trades faster than human beings can think or act. And we're not let into that game at all.
I know it.
In fact, most of us have not been in on that game on a 40-hour week basis, but the super rich and the big banks have been utilizing these advanced software programs to trade 168 hours a week. Mm-hmm. They're always on. So I began to investigate this issue of what's going on in this area of almost guaranteed returns, this notion of virtual guaranteed return on investment.
Right.
And I found that, in fact, investment advice has gotten so sophisticated that you can run these software programs for, let's say, 5 months or 6 months and have one down day in all of those months. In other words, they can make 1 to 3% per day. They can make 10 to 12% per week when we were being paid 1% on our passbook savings. So I've got involved what I've called the prosperity revolution.
All right.
And I'm promoting a specific company called USI because they've now turned that formula upside down and are now creating realistically opportunities for everyday people that can invest in that high velocity, high volume trading.
How's that working for you right now?
I'm in the phase where I'm sponsoring others, and I do not have my own skin in the game yet, but I will be investing.
And what kind of return do you expect to make, Andy?
400% per annum. See, this is let me be more specific. This is really germane to your program. In other words, I really should be sharing this with your listenership. There has been a financial cover-up. The cover-up that's occurred over the last 10 years is that the advent of high-velocity trading has created a situation where the big banks and the super rich have been making 400% gains on their money for years. They've been making 1% per day when we were being paid 1% per annum. And even now that we're being led onto those exchanges, we're only being permitted to trade 40 hours a week. The mechanized trading done by the big financial concerns is going on all the time. So there's an issue here of access to opportunity. And it really bothers me that this has happened, because we were supposed to be under a model of democratic capitalism, not some kind of neo-fascist, artificial intelligence administered concentration of wealth. Do you know that when Bill Clinton was elected, 80% of America's money was held by the top 20%.
Figures.
25 years later, remember what he was saying? He was saying things like, sure, there are more jobs, and I've got 3 of them, and I feel your pain, and America's working harder for less money. That's because the middle class was being liquidated. Now, where are we 25 years later? Where we are is that now 1/4% owns 80% of America's money. That's a concentration of money of 80-fold in 25 years. And most of that accelerated. Half of that concentration occurred in the last 10 years after the advent of high-velocity trading, utilizing these sophisticated algorithm-generated software programs that basically guarantee a return. Now, when Warren Buffett was going on the Oprah Winfrey Show crowing about what a smart stock picker he wasn't telling us he was putting a large part of Berkshire Hathaway simply on the Forex exchange under these money managers who could guarantee him 1% return per day. That's 365% per year.
Well, why couldn't somebody go back in time and then get the lottery number that they know would be the winner?
They could. They probably have.
Well, Andy, why don't you do that? And then give me a cut.
I'm no longer time traveling for the country. I did when I was a kid.
Yeah, but can you re-sign? Can you re-up on that?
Huh?
Can you re-up on that?
I think if I become president, I might be able to jump through some kind of teleportation mock-up on the White House lawn, and I will, but not until then. They're not going to let me back in the program. And why do you think they invented faux whistleblowers like Edward Snowden? I mean, it was to distract the public from the real whistleblowers like myself. I mean, most of what Snowden shared had been reported by Steve Kroft on 60 Minutes going back to February of 2000. Echelon and the whole eavesdropping on all of our electronic communications, that was old news. No, so they created a cadre of false whistleblowers to conceal the real ones, and I'm one of them.
Now, what do you think about people that believe the Earth is flat?
I believe they have a provocative theory based on, honestly, on extrapolations, logical extrapolations of evidence that sometimes are brilliant. But you know something?
What?
I just don't know. I went to Mars, but when we were in the jump room, we couldn't look back and see that whether Earth was round or flat.
Wow.
And I have to be honest that their own evidence implies that I don't know. I can say this, though. I can say that the Earth seems curvilinear, and when we see its shadow on the moon during certain eclipses. I can say that when I traveled from Washington State to Cordoba, Argentina to lecture in 2014, when I flushed the toilet, it went in the opposite direction based on the Coriolis effect. I can say that the tides are pulled. Would the tides be pulled on a flat Earth? I don't think so.
So why not? Well, what about the people that say they look across Lake Michigan and they can see straight across to Chicago and there's no curvature?
Well, then, if that's the case, why wouldn't we see the lights of Japan from California's shores?
That's a good one. I like that one. Well, man, there's a lot of hoaxes out there, and I'm just seeing where you're standing on that. Andrew, what do you think about Hollow Earth?
I can say that I know Brooks Agnew as a friend and ally. He's a great man, great friend.
Had him on the show.
Great person. Yeah, great guy. And that if Brooks Agnew, with all of his intelligence and his erudition, thinks there's relevance in the Hollow Earth subject, that I will defer to his judgment. I will say this in terms of my own experience, and that is that when we were walking on Mars, Mars is supposed to be 40% the mass of Earth. And yet, if it was, the differential would be 2.5. So if the average adult male stride is 3 feet, we should have easily been able to stride 7.5 feet on Mars, and we couldn't. We could only stride about 4 feet. There was a little bit of a lift, a little bit of a kick when we would stride forward.
All right.
That suggests that the Earth is less massive in its interior than we've been told. Because, for example, let's say you compare a cantaloupe to an orange. Okay, if they're both massive objects, then you've got the interior of those fruits, and the obvious type of the cantaloupe or pumpkin or whatever is bigger than an orange. That would be, Earth vis-a-vis Mars.
Yeah.
But take a cantaloupe skin and an orange rind and then compare them. If they're primarily hollow, then your differential in mass is going to be a lot closer. And that's what we seemingly experienced on Mars in terms of our ability to walk. So I'm just providing circumstantial evidence that the fact that we could only stride 4 feet rather than 7.5 feet on Mars indicates that probably Earth is less massive than the solid Earth that we were taught in school would indicate.
Andy, is there anything that you saw even back in the day when you were jumping, or have you heard of anything that predicts a future cataclysmic event on the Earth?
No. Nor did I see any evidence of a civil war, although we were given counterinsurgency trainings to overthrow a tyrannical government if it emerged.
If Trump is in any way overthrown, do you think there will be an uprising?
Well, I know that one reason I support him, and I urge others to support the president, is that he used the executive orders to get rid of the previous dictatorial executive orders that Bush Clinton, Bush Obama had put in place. That may be why my dad smiled and was treating the future presidency of Trump with such positive regard when he came on the Donahue show in the late 1980s. It was that if Trump, in fact, used executive orders to abolish the existing executive orders to impose martial law on the American people and direct the economy and everything and society from the executive branch of government, then Trump may go down in history as one of the greatest presidents of all time.
Hopefully he'll clear that swamp out, but the establishment is definitely against him. I know we talked about last time.
Yes.
Last time you were on the show, there's a certain specific date or time that you can go back in time, and then I don't remember if we talked about being able to jump to the future. Is that possible?
Yes, I was in one of the first probes to the future, which took place on November 5th, 1971, from ITT Defense Communications in Nutley, New Jersey, where we went forward to the year 2013 to remotely view the condition of the Supreme Court building on the Mall in Washington, D.C.
All right.
And in that probe, we found it under 100 feet of water. On this timeline, we came close to that event occurring in 2012 when a solar flare almost hit the Earth that would have caused hundreds of millions of deaths. It hit the Earth. Mm-hmm. But the Earth was rotated 1 degree, or that's 5 to 6 days. Mm-hmm. And as a result, that solar flare did not strike our planet. But on that timeline, it had, and Washington was underwater.
In the first hour, you were mentioning all the things that seem to be arrayed against the Trump presidency, including the hurricanes. Are those hurricanes being manufactured and controlled?
I don't have any specific information that indicates such a potentiality, but I mean, I think the whole implication of my public testimony is that we were developing devices that were 200 years in the future, 50 years ago. So we have to take account for the fact that there's been mass technical cover-ups of things like death rays, earthquake machines, hurricane machines, time travel devices. So as a general proposition, I would say we have to ask whether it's possible that different natural catastrophes are propagated utilizing technologies that are in the hands of the military and the intelligence community, right, and maybe even private factions or other governments.
Like George Soros.
And that have been, or private factions under wealthy individuals like Mr. Soros. And I was just wondering why he hasn't been arrested. I don't understand why he hasn't been arrested and charged with.
What about that? What about that molester Harvey Weinstein out there in California, man? He needs to be arrested.
Well, I'm sworn to uphold the law. I'm a member of the federal and state bar, and I endorse the prosecution of criminals. But I would just reserve my remarks to that because everybody has fair trial rights in the Sixth Amendment. So it's unlawyerly for me to comment on specific criminal matters.
Obviously you make your living in the lawyerly fashion. Has anybody ever questioned your sanity on that? I mean, when you talk
no, in fact,
talk about time
it's
travel.
Rare that it's rare that in the career of a lawyer somebody even gets on local television. So after I was on with Jesse Ventura, fellow lawyers were opening the door for me on the way into the courthouse.
Well, look at that. They need a time traveler in there to help them win their cases. Hey, go ahead. Has there been any jumping that you know of or any knowledge concerning what actually happened on 9/11? Were those planes that flew into the building, Andy?
Well, you have to remember that when you're accessing information from the future, for example, and taking it back, you could be accessing the conventional information. So when we saw the footage of 9/11 at the Aerojet Corporation facility in Socorro, New Mexico, in the summer of 1971, my dad and I were seeing the conventional footage. And when he was being asked, Ray, tell us about this 9/11 event. It's some kind of domestic Pearl Harbor. There's some kind of attack in downtown New York. Tell us what happened. My dad was giving the conventional account. He wasn't giving the conspiratorial account. So that's really that's all I can really say is that it's clear to me that the account my dad was giving was the Time magazine account, and not the Jim Marrs account.
Well, that Time magazine was a bunch of crap right there. Well, Andrew Basiago, we're getting right at the end of the broadcast here with you. Anything you'd like to say about your website? You go right ahead.
No, just again that I'm predicting a prosperity revolution because we're starting to see the incipient phases of it. Because one of the companies that's been advising the big banks and the super rich, USI, has created a subsidiary called USI Tech, and they are now creating opportunities for everyday people to enjoy the extraordinary profits that have been earned over the last 10 years for the very wealthy. And so if you're interested in becoming part of that revolution and being on my team, register with USI by visiting my link, which is adb.usi-tech.info.
Okay. All right. Andrew Basiago, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
Yes, I'd love it. I always enjoy being interviewed by you, Daniel. You're quite a character.
All right.
Quite a piece of Americana.
Right, there you go, man. I'm a pure cowboy too. All right, Andy, thank you for coming on the show, man. Good evening, then.
You too.
All right.
Have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, that was Andrew Basago here on the Edge television broadcast. If you missed any of the exciting broadcasts, we'll begin to replay here shortly in our main player. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and we'll podcast it as well. Of course, then we'll put it into our TuneIn Radio playlist. Don't you know? Well, that'd be a wrap for this evening. Just a quick question for those in the remaining live chat. How'd you like the new format tonight? Was it good, bad? What do you think about that? It's sort of in a widescreen format, where the other one was in a letterbox, but I think it produced a better video. Any comments on that? I'd like to know. That's it. Again, don't forget you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's going to be a wrap. Daniel Lott for The Edge.